All right, all right, all right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our third and final day of our Alteryx Server Blitz right here before 4th of July. I love all the excitement here. Ronaldo, thank you for the energy. We're excited to be talking about APIs today. Again, today you have Dallas Donizetti, Fernando, right? Feeling the love here today. We're going to be talking about Alteryx Server, API connectivity, what can you do with it, what are some of the cool things, and just start feeling some of the excitement here today. I know it's Friday right before 4th of July, but we got lots of things to start your weekend off with a bang, and let's go ahead and get into it. So as usual, we've got our fun question of the day, which would let's go ahead and kick it off with Dallas. And what was that last or like most recent aha moment that you had with Alteryx, or maybe even your first one, right?
Yeah, hi everyone. Happy Friday. Hope you guys are excited for the holiday weekend. And yes, Andrew, I think there are actually, I thought of two moments. One of them was with Designer and with a tool that most people, I don't think they know a lot about, and they think it's a little bit complicated to deal with. It's called Dynamic Replace. And basically, when I found out you could apply multiple expressions and easily replace your formulas with that tool, I was like, wow, why didn't I find out about this tool earlier, right? So this is one moment, I think, and the other moment was with Server when I found out there's an easy way to migrate the schedules from your local scheduler to Server, and there's an option in the admin page where you can do that. And I was doing that manually. I was like, why? Why am I doing that manually, right? And a lot of people had the scheduler component, and then they migrated to Server, and often they don't know about that. And I found out about that and was, ooh, that saved me a lot of time.
I've got actually a fun fact about that one. I learned about that tool before I learned about the dynamic input tool. That was one of the first ones that I learned how to deal with because we were replacing product information, and that thing is such a black box when you get started with it, but it's my favorite tool because there's so many things that you can do with it. Fernando, how about you? What's been your most recent aha moment, or what was your first one?
Yeah, first, I think the dynamic replace tool is a tool that I don't really understand it. Since you guys are talking that there are a lot of things to do, I think I'm gonna try to see that against it once again, because it's actually a tool that every time I think about using, I need to go to the help and get everything around. But for me personally, I think the tool that's or the thing that impressed the most of me was the download tool. I'm not a developer, a low level code developer, so I had no idea I would be able to someday do web scraping. And when I first did was an HTML, it was an easy one, but when I was able to do and to script a website, it was a true happiness for me. It was a really great time.
Yeah, I think well, I remember my first instance with a download tool, and it was actually scraping websites. And I remember that first moment when I got blocked from a website. And those first instances when you start learning about having to alter the IP address and getting into some crazy things, those are some of really exciting moments. I think probably the most recent one that I've had um, was, let's think about this, Intelligence Suite. is probably the most recent one. There's been a lot of aha moments with that, and honestly, it's been with new features. So I definitely want to give a shout out to the Alteryx product team for all that they're doing there, where they're just making things easier, right? So every day we go through, and I think as you've been using Alteryx for a while, the aha moments that I have a lot lately are more ones where like I'm watching a new user and they just do something that normally it takes me 3 or 4 steps to do, and I'm like, oh man, they simplified it. Like I don't even have to do that anymore. Like the interactive results grid. I mean, there were definitely some tears when they announced that, and I use that all the time now to be able to engage audiences and kind of drill in, especially as we start working with larger data sets.
Yeah, that made me remember about one post, one Alteryx community post, where I don't really remember the question, but it was something that a lot of aces were trying to answer, and it was a workflow with 20 to 30 tools, and one person goes there and use a single formula to solve all
Yeah.
of that. It was really embarrassing for me personally, because my workflow was one of those that had more than 30 tools, but that's life, right?
That's life, and I think people forget though, like especially with Alteryx, I don't think there's a wrong answer, right? As long as you're getting the solution. And when we're talking about APIs today, especially, there's a lot of different ways that you can work with APIs. So we'll be discussing a little bit about how you can use like the download tool with them, right? How can you use Python or R to connect to them? And then there's even some people who are saying are working with it and utilizing bat scripts, and then doing processing on the server from that perspective with MongoDB to grab some of that information as well. So part of it relates to the permissions that you have, maybe what your existing skill set is, and even some of the things that you want to learn. So I think let's go through and kind of discuss the different ways that we connect to server, and then some of the resources that are out there. Dallas, what are some of the different ways that you've connected to the server API endpoints?
Well, I always, actually, it's funny because I presented to the Dallas user group last Friday, and I was talking about that. And the best way, I think it's through Designer, because it's easy. It's easy and simple. There are macros available in the community, especially one that I like to use. It's called the API Runner macro, and it was developed by one other ace called Patrick Tigan. He's one of our colleagues, and he did a very good job on that macro. It's easy to use because you just have to input your keys and your secret, and basically decide which endpoint you're gonna call. So I think sometimes people think that they need to code to do that kind of work, right? They need to know a little bit of Python or JavaScript or something. But like for first starters like me, I'm not a coder, so I thought it was incredible. It was really easy to use, and it was so like the benefits that you get using the APIs, especially when you're doing server administration, they are huge, so
Nice.
I would recommend starting with Designer and use those macros. Basically, that would be my short answer.
I think that's the piece that I also want to give a shout out to Daigen, right? And as we're kind of talking about this, I want to make sure that we're also acknowledging, like even aces use other aces stuff, right? So the exciting part about having a community that's so robust and giving, like the Alteryx community is really good about sharing things, is that you should take advantage of some of that. What I do recommend is if you're in a secure environment, especially when we're talking about dealing with APIs, just make sure you crack it open to make sure that there's nothing malicious there, right? A majority of what you see, you can look at how many times people have downloaded it. And if you're seeing, hey, literally hundreds of people are downloading this, you can feel confident that it's safe. And when we discuss that, I mean, even we use that as a building point, right? So if that's our new starting point, then just like you see with science in other fields, it's not like we're trying to rediscover dark matter, right? And we've got to start from scratch. We can start from that knowledge point, and that's no longer an unknown unknown, and we can really dive in beyond that and see, okay, now what can I do to take this to the next level, especially as the API endpoints continue to improve. Fernando, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think the thing that helped me the most, I think, was when an admin API to get all the workflows that there were in the gallery. So we need to list everything to see how was the usage, and one of the easier ways was to use an API call.
Definitely. So what are, like, as we kind of talk about that, you talked about the admin API. There's a few different ones that exist out there, right? So there's the user API and there's the admin one, and they each have version 1 and 2, right? So as we kind of talk about those, something that I would recommend everybody doing is if you do have an Alteryx server, going to the API documentation there, because it actually acts like Swagger, where you can go in and literally participate in some of that from a documentation perspective, engage and kind of understand. And what I'm going to do is post the link here for the Alteryx public gallery API documentation, just so everyone can kind of see that, right? So if you're on YouTube, you'll see that link, and we'll also share that on LinkedIn as well. And when we look at that endpoint, that's going to help you see some of the components that you need just to get started. Dallas, you want to talk a little bit about like some tips and tricks for getting started with the endpoints there?
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned the documentation, right? And the documentation is interactive. So yeah, like you said, you can start testing the calls by simply getting your key and your secret, and documentation will tell you how to do that. But it's basically accessing your profile in the gallery and grabbing those, and then you can start testing those calls, right? I think that's a really good way to get started, because you can see first, you can understand how the response looks like of each call. So that really makes a difference, because now you can, oh, this information is useful for me, or this information is not useful for me, or where should I go to get that, right? And you can also see what kind of endpoints actually request maybe a parameter, an extra parameter, or maybe even test those parameters there, right? So like, you don't need to build the whole thing, build the code and everything to test the parameter. Like, is that the parameter that the API is expecting or not, right? And I use that a lot. So I think that's a really good way to start testing that without having, you don't even need to code or anything like that. You don't even need to use Designer for that. You can just go ahead and test it, and really read the documentation, because it's pretty useful right there, and you probably will have it all.
Yeah, and I think it's important to see some of the responses, right? So you know what you're requesting, and then also what levers you really have to pull in terms of those requests. So an example would be like prioritization of workflows. You can actually set that in the API call, as well as another one that we talked about yesterday. If you missed that session, it's recorded. It's on our LinkedIn Live, as well as our YouTube channels, so you can hit that subscribe button and see the last video that we did, where we were talking about workflow tags and the tagging for the jobs, and that can assign it to a specific worker node, and you can actually set that in the API call as well. and that can be extremely handy in terms of making sure that job is going to the right place, because some individuals will use a separate orchestration tool as mandated by like their IT department. So what may be kicking off those jobs are like Azure DevOps. You may have Jenkins triggering that job, or you may be using an enterprise orchestration tool that is orchestrating other work. And then as we talk about that execution, now you're able to go in and assign that to a specific lane, just like you would within the user interface of Alteryx.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
And
think. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Fernando. Sorry, go ahead.
So I think one of the greatest thing, Thales mentioned the API documentation, and you can test everything there. And after that, since now we have the tool that everyone comment here, the API runner tool, you can only copy everything that you have tested to Designer, and I think with five tools or something like that, you can get everything that you really want. So that's some great stuff. And you actually you can find some examples of the API connection using that API runner tool in the community. It's a simple search.
Mhm.
And there's actually a couple different flavors of this that I have personally on my desktop, just because they have some slight nuances in terms of differentials. I definitely feel like the one that's posted in the chat is the best one. But as we kind of talk about these, I think each environment has their own way of kind of handling the scheduling. And then also, we haven't even really talked about how you can chain apps, which I know has been a passion of Thales's lately, kind of going through and chaining apps using the Alteryx Gallery API. And when we discuss this, it's very exciting because up until now, really what people you may be familiar with or may not have discovered yet are the crew macros. And I love them with all my heart, but definitely it's like a family member. There's some things that get on your nerves on occasion with those as time goes on. And I think this just presents another opportunity for us, especially if you're working with a server, to kind of help make things smoother. And then also from a transparency and documentation perspective, it helps make things cleaner. Dallas, did you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're saying like the differences between the crew and the chaining app with the chained apps with the API.
Yeah, and even just your experience getting started with those,
Mhm.
with that idea and concept.
Yeah. So yeah, the thing that you can do with the APIs is basically based on some calls, you can get the job status, right? And when you think about chaining jobs or chaining workflows, chaining apps, whatever you want to call, it's about that. It's about posting a job in the queue of the server, and then basically retrieving its status. And if it's successful, or if it failed or something, you can put another API call to publish another workflow or do something else. So basically, that's how you would code that. Of course, it requires, if you're building in Designer, you would require basically an iterative macro, maybe, or even a batch macro to run a list of workflows. So it really depends on how you want to structure your process. If you're doing using a programming language, there are loops that you can use, and that, I think that would be even easier to build if you have knowledge of the API in that programming language, right? With the crew macros, the thing is that you run things on your local disk, right? So the crew macros reference to a workflow that is in your local disk, and that's the biggest. I would say the pinpoint there, because you can reference workflows from the gallery using the API. So they're already there. They're already in the studio. They have an ID. They're traceable, right?
Mhm.
And you get everything that you have with the gallery. And when you place workflows on your local disk, you basically lose the point of having server, right? So that's the main problem with the crew macros. Of course, they're an easy workaround and they're easy to set up. You just basically need a workflow and chain the runner macro tools, but they're going to reference a workflow in your local disk that will get you like a lot of maintenance problems, and even like from a hardware perspective, you're putting things there, and you have risk of having everything deleted by some reason, or if you have a disk problem, you basically lose everything. So I think these are the main differences. But still, what I'm still missing, it's like there's you I'm feeling like I need to do that, and I can do that. I just need more time, but there's no like ready to go solution for that right now in the community, or at least for free, let's say, right? And I think yeah, it requires some work, but I would love to see some easy solution, like you just grab a code and just put your key in secret and run those change jobs. And I think that's something that is missing out there, I would say.
And if you guys would like to see something like that, right? Obviously, it helps when we get things upvoted from our followers and stuff. So if you would like to see that, please throw it in the chat. And then obviously we can go and make sure that we get time allocated for these things in the future, so we can share all of that with you guys for free. And I think something that's really important here that we've been discussing is we've been talking about kind of chaining these different aspects here, and we haven't really differentiated what the API is used for, because up until like the last couple versions, it's really been around scheduling standard workflows, right? And there's been some new developments within the API endpoints. You can't really see it on the Alteryx public gallery that we listed it, but if you have a server that's private to your company, you'll notice with that version 2, it actually unlocked the ability to do analytics apps as well on your server. So literally, if we have a file or other parameters that we want to pass through, then we can actually provide that to the API endpoints and process all of it. Now, as we kind of talk about this, do you guys want to share any examples that you've seen where people have done this, or some examples that you would like to help others implement?
Yeah, I think I have one example. It's a simple example, but I think it's applicable to anyone, right? So when we talk about the user app, the user API, sorry, we think that you can connect every other system to Alteryx, to the Alteryx gallery, right? So actually, you can go to using your own website and to have something like a registration of a user to validate anything, or credit score, or something, anything like that, and you can leverage the API for that. So that's a great thing to start, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to your point, Andrew, what really changed with version 2 was the ability, like you said, to upload files, right? So before, the file browse tool was not supported as a question type with analytic apps. That caused a big problem, because a lot of people like to use server or apps to make, to be able to provide the user this possibility of uploading their own file, right, and process the data inside a workflow. So with the V2, now you have an endpoint where you store files in the server, and then these files have an ID to reference, and this ID can be used in the questions when you publish, when you're posting an app, right, in the queue of the server. So basically, that was the main change, I would say, for V2 user. With a V2 admin, you get the schedule forecast API right now, which is a new feature of server 2021.1. So basically, you now have this really cool feature where you can forecast the schedules to see, what's the best time to schedule a job. And this admin API is cool because of that. It will return you all of that information related to that, where you can plan your schedules better. So yeah, they're improving the API definitely. I think. Well, I was gonna say, I actually was gonna say in the first day, what I know that they're discontinuing Hub, but what I missed about Hub was the API, was all of those possible APIs that we had. So I hope Server is going to inherit them, or it's going to basically absorb them.
And I think we need to do like a small moment of silence here for the passing of Hub in commemoration for everything that they put together.
Definitely.
Okay, we'll say goodbye here. I actually love everything that they were working on and doing there, and I'm excited to see them go back to the core products, right? And they'll be integrating a lot of that, those new capabilities within Server, and I expect to see that happening over the next several months. And I know that they're really excited and shared during Inspire, the web browser version of Alteryx, right? So when we have a web-based version, if you guys are on a Mac right now, it gives you an opportunity to kind of integrate. And as we discuss like API endpoints, we'll see TBD on how all this is going to integrate. And we'll keep you posted here on how that's going to work. But as we talk about those integrations and understanding how this works, let's start real basic, because we never really introduced how you get started with the Alteryx Server API endpoints. So let's say I already have access to the Alteryx Server and I have artisan permissions. Who would I need to go to ask for permissions to use the API endpoints?
Yeah, let me get that. Sorry. But I think the first thing you need to do is talk to your admin, right? So you have, I think, two places that you need to give access to, and it's the user settings, where you can turn on like schedules or so on, to the user to be able to use that API. And also for the subscription only, you need also to go to the subscription page and allow that for the users to start using it. And if you have that already, you have all the authorization that you need, you can go to your profile page and you will find there a key tab. And that you will be able to use the API documentation to try everything.
Yeah, and let's take a moment to differentiate, because there's actually two of them, right?
Yeah.
So there's one that's specific to your subscription, and then there's another one for admin. So you may have rights to half of them, and then depending obviously on your permissions within the environment, you may have accessibility to one of those, but not the other. And that you can work through and navigate, and our recommendation is really to kind of showcase the use case that you have, which would make it important to elevate your access permissions. Talis, did you have something to add there?
Yeah, no, I was gonna add that a lot of people ask or complain, let's say, sometimes that a lot of those things need to be requested to a server admin. In some companies, that this could be like a tough conversation depending on what it is. And what I was gonna say is, because this needs to be done because of a security perspective. When you think of using the APIs or enabling users to access the APIs, you give them options to basically publish workflows, post workflows to the gallery. And this is not really traceable from a gallery perspective. And one thing that I wanted to add to the discussion after that is because every call that you do through the API is not visible through the gallery. Okay, so if you put a job in to run from the API, if you actually are retrieving job status from the API, that's all related to calls that were made through the API. That's not related to anything that is done in the gallery. So that's why I think the API access is really restricted to the admins, and they need to know who is doing that kind of work. Otherwise, the server gets out of control if all the people learn about that, and they start, just putting workflows to run every time by a simple click.
So what you're saying is everything that we're talking about here today is really a secret. So don't share this with your friends, guys. We don't want too many people knowing about it in your environment. You got to hold the keys and the power for that. I'm just kidding. You can
Almost
definitely
like that.
share. Yeah. I think as we talk about that, right, one of the other pieces that we want to highlight is, Dallas, where do these workflows go? Do they end up in the queue, or do they go into like a separate little area in terms of execution?
No, they go into the queue. I mean, when you think about it, it's basically it's gonna do the same thing that a job does when we're talking about the Alteryx service, right? It pulls the Alteryx engine and it runs that workflow. So it gets in the queue, and it's obviously gonna compete with other workflows that are run through the gallery. So basically, you have to think about that rule of thumb that you have, like or not the rule of thumb, but that system setting that you have where you can run a specific amount of workflows at the same time. And you have to consider those API workflows as well, right? So they will get in queue. They will go through the same process, first in, first out, that we see. But the thing is that they're not traceable through the gallery. So that's one thing that you need to have in mind. So it is good that your admin also uses the API and actually can track all of this job, because the there's a difference, and that's a little trick here that I'm actually going to share with you. There's a jobs API call from the user perspective. That's all the jobs that the user actually posted through the API. And there's a jobs API call through the admin perspective, which is basically that jobs call basically lists all the jobs, even those that were not made through the API. So the admin one actually gives you that whole full perspective of all the jobs that are running into your server environment. But the user one, no, the user one is restricted to all of those jobs that were called through the API. So that kind of gives the difference. And of course the admin can have that overview and can at least track that if they know, they have knowledge of the API.
Yeah, and I think when we kind of talk about that, that's a huge differentiating factor from like utilizing the crew macros, especially if you're doing it locally on the server, right? So when we talk about that, the difference of it going into the queue versus having it local on the server is that means maybe we have jobs already scheduled and we could already be doing, let's say that math is number of cores divided by 2 is the typical math, right? And as we're talking about that, those cores, as we're discussing that math, will really tell you how many simultaneous jobs should be running. But if we locally execute using like a bat script, instead of using the API endpoints to execute the jobs for a crew macro, we could override that number of jobs that we want and then make the server unstable, right? So as we're kind of talking about this and using different methodologies, I'm always an advocate of having different levers to pull, and then also making sure that you're using those regularly. That way you don't have one particular method overextended. An example of this would obviously be how you publish maybe your data sources to Tableau server, right? So that's another API call that you're constantly doing to another server. And as we're discussing that, a majority of people see the publish to Tableau server macro and they go crazy there using the endpoint and publishing the data sources there. And then what that does to the Tableau server is now it's almost making it a database by storing all the data there. And then Tableau's responsible for housing and maintaining those. And really it's a visualization platform, right? And there are use cases where that's advantageous, but we may also want to look at should we have a live connection, right? Which is just like this Alteryx environment where we say, maybe feeding from our website, we want to react to those people who are going on our website, and we may want to tell them, hey, thank you for reaching out and checking out some of our materials. Now let's have it go through an Alteryx workflow and we send them some additional information, or we forward that to a sales rep with some additional demographics appended from our Experian data package, right? So as we talk about integrating all that together, that's where having those API endpoints becomes advantageous, and then we can kind of work from there. And we use that here internally at Data Meaning, and I think that touches really on those single use cases, and we haven't even touched on like SDLC environments. So let's touch on those, which is like software development lifecycle. That means you have a dev server in Alteryx, maybe a QA, and a production one. What are some advantages of being able to use the API endpoints there? And what are some of the environments that we've seen here collectively that we would like to talk about?
Yeah, I think well, do you want to talk a little bit about, Fernando? Do you want to start off with the
Yeah, sure.
discussion? Mm-hmm.
But I think that the best thing that the APIs brought to us as related to the migration API requests, and that helps everyone. Even if you only have a single node server where you are separating between two studios, a dev and a prod studio, you can do something around that. So you can use the request to move or to copy the workflow from one place to another. That's a great thing. That's something that everyone had a problem with, and the API emerged to help everyone else.
Yeah, and I would refer also to the migration cycle that Alteryx recommends, and it's basically if you think about thinking about two separate physical servers, right? A sandbox one and a prod one. You can basically flag some workflows that are ready for migration. So basically, think about if you're doing you're developing, you're doing a project, and you are basically, you said, okay, someone went there, validated that workflow. That workflow is ready to go to production, right? So you can use the API to flag that. You can even use the API to flag that. So if you had a website or something, or even a system or something like that, the person who is validating that workflow just would need to click a button, and then they would send an API call to that server, and it would be put ready for migration. And you could even have another button that would say, okay, now publish that workflow into the prod server, right? And then you send that call again, and you basically post that workflow that is ready for migration to the prod server. So I think that gives you a lot of possibilities to automate this process. And of course, there are a few things that might need to be adjusted, like the connections. From a connection standpoint, sometimes you need to change, like, oh, it's a workflow. This workflow is connecting to a sandbox data source. Now it's going to connect to a prod data source. So you need to tweak a little bit, of course, to make, maybe change the DSN names based on an XML change or something like that. But this is totally, I mean, when you think about it, it's totally possible, and opens up a lot of possibilities with the server.
And I think that's incredible to kind of talk about those different points. And we've seen everything, I think, especially over the last couple years. I've been here at Data Meaning in regards to this, everything from, hey, we've got a single environment where we're just preparing, and maybe we've been expanding so well, we want to add on a sandbox environment or a production environment, right, and expand it out. So we start flagging things for migration so we can increase the server size, right? And then we've been in environments where there are literally 4 or 5 different server environments within the same vertical, right? So not even talking about different team servers, but literally the same stack in regards to SDLC. And what's incredible about this is from a culture perspective, you've got a broad spectrum, everything from, hey, everybody who has a designer license has access to the production environment and can promote it there, to only IT has access to the production environment from a workflow promotion perspective. And really, the production environment is about those analytics apps and scheduled jobs executing in a timely manner, and for participation from the entire enterprise for, let's say, a few thousand users as an example, right? And when we discuss those different spectrums, that's where I appreciate that Alteryx has really given us the flexibility to do that, where we can not only just flag those workflows for migration, but then we can design a workflow which will allow us to help integrate that maybe with our ticketing systems as an example for approval, or even if you have a cab, which is a board that is meant to review some of those workflows, and it may have a couple Alteryx experts on it, some subject matter experts to review business rules, etc. So that way we're covered from an audit perspective to make sure that we have a strong standing whenever we promote these things to production. We've seen a variety of these cases and have helped our customers successfully implement there. And I think that's the exciting part about being an ACE, and then also seeing some of these things deployed. And if you would like to see more of like some of this documentation, if you post it in the comments, we'll start adding that in regards to some of the assets that we'll be sharing out with the public. And then you can get an idea for free of some of the ways that maybe you can approach this with management and expand your Alteryx footprint within your company. So I know that's definitely quite a bit that we've covered in terms of ground. Are there any other tools that you guys want to talk about? I know we've been focused primarily on the Alteryx API endpoints, right? Are there any other endpoints that you guys have connected to the Alteryx API endpoints?
Like you say, like external tools and stuff.
Yeah.
Not connected directly to Alteryx API endpoints, but I was well, talking about Designer a little bit. There are some of them that you need to work on, and there are some connectors that can help you. Especially one of them that is always changing. It's a little bit painful as the Google one, I would say, because every time they make some changes to it, and it's basically you have to redo your macro or your connector. And there are different ones. I mean, there's one for Google Drive. There's one for Google Sheets and Google Analytics. So this one is a little bit tricky. And I think when you talk about APIs, it's all about understanding documentation. But some of them require extra steps from a security standpoint, and they are hard to maintain, I would say, right? There are some of them that they renew the key every time, and then you have to handle that in Alteryx. It's a little bit, it could be painful in some ways. Even like for the Salesforce one as well, I saw like the Salesforce connector tool. If you have a bunch of them, then you have to change credentials depending on what you're doing. That can be a little bit painful, but I think there's when I see that, I always see an opportunity to create a process that would get rid of all these problems, and I totally think it's possible when you think about Alteryx. It's just a matter of sitting down and thinking about it and doing it.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think one of the favorite courses that I have that we offer is actually one where it allows you to connect stock data, so you get it from almost like a ticker system. It reminds me of Yahoo Finance. It's called Vantage. And what's interesting about that one is literally it gives your API key like that. And whenever you have that, then you can do a request. And all of us are familiar with some level of stock information. So you could put your favorite ticker in there, like AYX for Alteryx, right? And then essentially grab that data. And as we pull that in, we may actually want to trigger an analytics app within Alteryx. And we can now go ahead and upload that file or even those parameters and then trigger the Alteryx workflow from there. So what you'll see sometimes is we may want to elicit information from another API endpoint or even have that drop it somewhere, just like a file system like an SFTP may encounter. And we can go ahead and start talking about chaining different aspects like this, where you can establish some of that triggering and then help those APIs work together. And that's where you see a lot of the integrations with Alteryx happening with like RPA platforms, right? So those platforms could include like Blue Prism, you've got UiPath, Automation Anywhere, and we start to see those more closely playing here. And literally the package that Alteryx has with UiPath is relating to the Alteryx API endpoints, right? So we're looking at the different ways that we can examine how this is integrated, how it's called, and that just allows us to kind of take some of these things to the next level.
Yeah, and we can't forget there's an engine API, right? Not just the server, the gallery API that we know of, but there's also an engine API, and then you can integrate that with Designer. So I basically think that's probably what other tools do when trying to integrate with Alteryx Designer.
Nice.
Yeah, one thing that I would like to talk about, changing a bit of the gears here, the relation, but I think we know that the gallery API is a bit specific. It's a bit hard for a lot of people to find the use for that. But I think one thing that I would like to talk about is related to the subscriptions. I know a lot of people has been seeing that pop-up that says that subscriptions will be gone. I think in a matter of year, it will not exist anymore, the studios or subscriptions. So when they will resolve that to migrate everything from the studio to the collection using an API. So for those that doesn't see really the use for the API, I think it's better for you to start using it, start trying to use, because when you move from, if you want to upgrade your server and you would like to get all the new features, you will have to use the API to move everything from one to another. So, and I would like to ask you, Thales and Andrew, if you are concerned about that. What do you think about the removing of the studio?
I almost feel like Dallas is the best one to answer this question because he's been handling some of the AH migrations, right? And so as we look at AH sunsetting, he's helping some customers deal with this right now, where literally it's, hey, we're looking to migrate over to server, and then just kind of dealing with those API endpoints, so you don't necessarily have to do all of it via the UI. Dallas, you want to touch on a little bit of that?
Yeah, well, the main difference with Hub was the site, right? So the site structure, and it was all user based. I think studios came as a concept before collections, I would say, and it was basically a way to gather everyone in a single thing. And now what I think what Alteryx is trying to do is basically change that to a user level, right? So everything you publish to a studio, if you share that studio with other people can see it. And what I think Alteryx is trying to do is basically, no, now it's all user based, right? So everything will be attached to that user. And then, of course, they're going to try to change some of the aspects of like maybe inheriting workflows from other users, like you can do with studios right now. That probably will change a little bit. But I think I think now they're redesigning that, and because it's basically, if you think about it, it would add an extra security layer, right, for the user. I think it's not really good for the user to, uh, to share that kind of stuff. Maybe at the first level, it's good for the user to have the ability to share if they want, right? So if they want to share to a collection, that's good. If not, they can keep their work on their side, and the admin might be able to move that around, but not being expose that to other users. And that's what I think they're doing when they're trying to migrate everything to collections, and that'll make more sense in my opinion.
Come on, guys. I thought all this transition over was going to be like training for the Grand Prix, right? If we had to open this many workflows and move them all with the visualizations, you could, or through the user interface, you would get some practice for Grand Prix, right?
Yeah, I think that's what they thought of. Now we have a lot of really fast users and and Grand Prix winners that are breaking records every year.
Definitely. So what are some things, like, let's talk from an inspirational perspective. What are some things that you guys would like to see come from the APIs, or that you're hoping are going to be released, let's say here in the next year, maybe by next Inspire in Denver?
I need to think a bit about.
Okay.
Yeah, I think with the gallery API, I would like to see more around options to change schedules, to also change things in collections. Now, right now, the only thing we have there is just a list of collections. So I would like more options to do that kind of thing, to move things around collections maybe, or change specific parameters in the collections, add users to collections. So that's not available right now, right? And when you think about it, that would save a lot of time. Like, imagine someone wants to, of course, now we have custom groups. That also saved a lot of time for people, for adding like multiple users to a collection, for example, or giving them credentials at once, right? But I still think with the API, you could have more flexibility around that. You don't need to put everyone into a group, right? You just have a list of users, and then you just send them to add them to a collection, or add them, for example, permissions to a data connection, right? So I think that would make the admin's life easier, thinking about an admin perspective. And from a user perspective, I would say more integration with the gallery, right? So like I said, a lot of the things are done under the hood, so you cannot see them in the interface. And I would like better communication with the gallery interface. Like, oh, okay, I did something through the API, and I can see it in the gallery, right? I can see the outputs there. I can see the results there. That would be really nice.
Yeah, I think another aspect that I'd really like to see is Alteryx Connect does this. It actually mirrors all of the users that you have in server and carries them over. I would love to see, like, if I have another self-service analytics platform like Click or Tableau or Power BI, if I already have those groups and stuff established, can you just migrate it over for me so I don't have to deal with setting that back up in a new system? Or even like some of the data connections, right? If I have the same service accounts, can we talk about being able to do that and share some of that information? I think that would provide some transparency and make it a little easier. Obviously, that's on my wish list, because we're not factoring anything like security and all that in there from that perspective. But I think it's helpful to kind of talk about some of what we see as aspirational. And don't forget, I mean, the Alteryx community is always listening. They have the ideas board. we're talking about some of these things. I know a couple of them are already posted there, but if you have some that you're thinking about yourself, feel free to go on community.alteryx.com and check out the ideas board. They have it for server, for connect, for designer, right? You can propose some new things that you would love to see there, and then hit us up in the messages. And if you think it's a great idea and you would like us to hit that like or love button, we'd be happy to do that. So let's talk here for just a second. I know we're at the final minutes here before the bell. What are some other sessions that you guys see that you would love to do here in the next month or so for the community and our followers?
I think it would be great for us to have a specific session for design users for them to ask us how. I think every single doubt is really does really matter for us. So how to build something or anything like that, it would be great to also do.
I think, well, two topics that I like to see is one of them is integration with data visualization tools. Of course, I'm a more advocate of Tableau, but it would be nice to see other use cases with Power BI and or Click or some others there. But the other thing is one topic that I think it's more subjective, but it's really nice to talk about, and I think it brings a lot of people to discussion, is how to use Alteryx to basically empower people in a company, right? And how to integrate Alteryx with the with the end users, and basically, apply the self-service analytics concept in your organization, right? So there are a few different I would say tactics, right, on this, and I would like to talk more and hear more of the audience how they are dealing with that, because it's really interesting to share that kind of knowledge.
Awesome. And I think for me, it's around a lot of integrations. Like I had the SALT talks with Kate from Dedicated, which deals with Snowflake and Tableau, right? As we talk about those different integrations, I'm thinking about what's coming in the future. So am I working with RPA tools? Is it with code, right? What are we doing with like Jupyter Notebooks integration? And then all the connectors that we see out there, and then some that people are just sharing, right? And as we kind of talk about this, some of this is on the developer portion of the community, which is wonderful. And then we even have a question here from Marcus who's asking, is the Alteryx community a good place to learn about server as well as desktop? Heck yes, it is. There's lots to learn about on server in the community. I would definitely recommend checking out the knowledge articles. I think that's where a bulk of the information is. And then you'll see some other stuff that's applying there, especially when you talk about questions around authentication, etc. And then even like the API endpoints, right? If you're looking for some common problems that exist, or some things that you might encounter, then it provides you with some transparency around how to go about solving some of those pieces, right? So I think those are some of the things that I hope to see in the future. Another one that I would love to talk about is different ways to kind of structure your Alteryx server environment. How can you do that based on the team that you have today? And then we haven't even touched on any of the other aspects of the platform, like connect, promote, or the mystery bag one, which I always refer to as the data package, right? Nobody really ever talks about that enough in terms of in-depth. How do you just get started with it? So I definitely want to touch on some of those points.
Yeah, and just to add to Marcus' question, remember what Fernando said, the Data Meaning YouTube channel has really good videos, webinars that we did on server. So check out there, because I think it's pretty compact, right, Fernando? You can talk more about that, but it's really compact, and we really address a lot of cool things there.
Yeah, I think if you have no idea what a studio means, what a collection means, you have it's a five video series that talks about everything that you need from in server. Of course, after that, if you have problems, other questions, you can go to the Alteryx community. But for me personally, I think that those videos are the best.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. I really appreciate all your comments in the chat. Thank you, Talis and Fernando, for being on here with me today. I can't wait to see more from the ACE Corner here at Data in the Meaning with Data in the Wild. And I hope everyone has a great weekend. And of course, we got to do a legendary like mic drop here today, right? So thank you all for joining and have a great weekend.
I don't have a mic. I can do that. I can do that.
Awesome.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
I actually do have a mic.
You do have a mic. All right.
Thank you, guys.